throughout the presentation, that'll be great. Also, if you would like to use the Zoom chat box below on the toolbar down at the bottom of your screen, please feel free to communicate with me there. And at the end of the presentation, I'll answer any questions that you might have. I'm Ann Carmichael, and I want to thank Mrs. Brown for inviting me to present today on the student financial aid process. I am a student financial aid consultant, and I've been in the business for over 20 years. I don't know everything or every answer, but if I don't know the answer to your question, I certainly know where to go to get that answer. So I hope by the end of the presentation that everybody has a better understanding of the process. And as I'm sure Mrs. Brown has told you, the Louisiana Department of Education asks that the class of 2021 submit the free application for federal student aid. And this is a requirement for graduation again this year. The purpose is to make sure that your money is ready and waiting for you once you do begin college in the fall. Or even if you sit out a semester, it'll be waiting for you in the spring. Because college can be expensive, it's time to start thinking about the process and the costs that you're going to run into. So a few of those costs are going to include equipment, books and supplies, so your textbooks, notebooks, calculators if you need a new computer to help you through the post-secondary experience. Your federal student aid will help pay for that. Your personal expenses like your phone bill, money to do your laundry and fuel for your car, and any food purchases that might be outside of your meal plan if you purchase that while you're on campus. Your room and board, which is going to include your dorm room or your apartment. If you do live in an apartment, you'll be paying for your electricity, water, and gas, and you'll be buying your own groceries and cleaning supplies. And then tuition and fees like your parking, library, technology, and athletic fees, and campus transportation. And when you look on your college's websites, you will see the tuition most times line itemed for you, but you might not be aware of some of the fees. So make sure you're talking to your admissions representative and understanding exactly what the complete cost of your tuition and fees are going to be, including your expenses. Now, the good news is that financial aid is available from the US government, your state government, the college or career school that you're going to be attending, and nonprofit and private organizations. Every year, the federal government provides more than $120 billion in student financial aid, and a lot of that does go unawarded. So we just want to make sure you're ready for the process and your money is there waiting for you when you get there. Types of federal student aid include the federal Pell Grant, the federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant, the Teacher Education Assistance for College and Higher Education Grant, the Iraq and Afghanistan Service Grant, Federal Work Study, and direct subsidized, unsubsidized, and PLUS loans. Federal grants are a form of financial aid that doesn't have to be repaid. So you always want to accept any grant monies that you're offered. And the federal grants include Pell, which is for undergraduates with financial need. FSEOGs are for undergraduates with exceptional financial need. So you could actually be offered a Pell Grant and an FSEOG. Then the service grant is for the students of military parents who died defending the country following 9/11, and the Teach grants for students pursuing a teaching career. The Federal Work Study Program provides part-time jobs to help pay for your college expenses. So when you tell the financial aid office that you're interested in federal work study, they'll consider you for this program. The earnings are going to be paid directly to you, and they should be used to pay for your college expenses. When you state on the FAFSA that you're interested in federal work study, which we encourage all students to do, this just lets the financial aid office know that you're interested. It doesn't obligate you to take a position, but it lets them know to offer you a job if there are those available on your college campus. Direct subsidized loans are based on financial need, and no interest is going to be charged on these loans until you graduate or cease to attend. Now, everybody is eligible for unsubsidized loans, but the interest is going to start accruing on this type of loan once it's fully dispersed. So that's usually in the spring. With student loans, you'll get a disbursement in the fall for the fall semester, and then the other half will be dispersed in the spring. Once that spring disbursement hits your account, it's going to start accruing interest. So you can see that there is a big difference between subsidized and unsubsidized loans, and you always want to accept the subsidized loans first if you need money to help pay for your college education. You can remember this by saying the U in unsubsidized means that you always pay that interest, and that's something you want to try to avoid. If you are offered loans and you need them, you'll want to accept the federal student loans first because the payments aren't due until you graduate or cease to attend. The interest rate on federal student loans is fixed at a lower rate, and no credit check is going to be required. On the other hand, with the private loans, these are going to sometimes be, payment is going to be required while you're still in school, and the interest rate's going to be variable, and often it's much higher. And they might ask for a cosigner. So make sure you're doing your research before you accept any loans, but especially the private loans. So to dispel the myth, everyone is eligible for some type of federal student aid. All federal student aid and most institutional and private aid is contingent upon completion of the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA. And that launched on October 1st, and it opens every October 1st. So remember, every year you're in college, you're going to need to complete a new FAFSA. Student financial aid is awarded on a first come, first served basis. So you want to get your FAFSA submitted as soon as possible. And remember to pay close attention to the deadlines that are set forth by your college, by the state, by federal student aid, and also I'm sure your counselor might have some deadlines for you in order to meet your high school graduation requirement. So check with her as well. You want to begin the FAFSA process by collecting all of the documents needed to complete the form, and they include the student's social security card and the parents' cards as well. The FAFSA and the FSA ID do ask you to use the name printed on your social security card, even if your name has changed since you were issued this card. So your most recent card will be needed. 2019 federal income tax returns for the parents and the student if they filed. W-2s. These are issued by your employer, and this is what your tax preparer uses to prepare your federal tax return. Sometimes there will be information on this W-2 that might not be reported on the tax return itself. So gather your W-2s and your bank statements and records of investments, because you're going to be asked to provide the balances of these accounts as of the date that you submit the FAFSA. You want to begin by creating the Federal Student Aid ID. This is going to allow the student and parents to identify themselves electronically when they're accessing federal student aid websites, such as the FAFSA. It consists of a unique username and password that's created by you and should reflect only your personal information. Each student and one parent should create an ID by visiting the website fsaid.ed.gov, and only your email address and phone number and personal information should be provided when you're creating your ID. Don't share information such as your parent's mobile phone. Many cases, students don't have an alternate telephone, so they might use mom or dad's mobile phone. That's going to be considered shared information, so that when you're ready to sign your FAFSA, you're going to run into some problems if your parent has also used their own mobile phone, and vice versa. If you don't have a personal email address, please don't use your school email address for FAFSA and FSA ID purposes, because once you graduate and your school email account is disabled, Federal Student Aid is not going to have any way to contact you about your award. So be sure that you have a personal email address. If you don't, now's a good time to apply for one. Your FSA ID username and password is your official, legal, electronic signature. So make sure you're recording it and keeping it in a very safe place, and you don't want to share it with anyone else. Now, if you don't have access to a computer when you start on your FAFSA, you can download the FAFSA mobile app. It's called My Student Aid, and you can use it to submit your FAFSA on your mobile phone or any other device that has internet access. Or if you prefer, you can complete the FAFSA using the web-based version at fafsa.gov. Now, if the student likes to use their mobile device and they want to download the app and begin the student portion of the FAFSA on the mobile device, and then later the parent prefers the web-based version, all the information is going to be combined into one FAFSA for the student. So that'll be fine as well. You want to begin your FAFSA by logging in with the student's FSA ID, because this FAFSA is in the student's name. It's the student's application for federal student aid. The parent FSA ID is only going to be used if you choose to transfer your tax information from the IRS into the FAFSA, and then again to sign the student's FAFSA. High school class of 2021 should be completing the 2021-2022 FAFSA. Why? That is because you're applying for federal student aid for the academic year that you're planning to attend. So if you complete the 2020-2021 FAFSA now, the colleges that you're sending your data to are going to assume that you're starting college this year. If you are, then you'll want to complete both FAFSAs, but definitely for graduation purposes, you want to start the 2021-22 FAFSA. There are 8 sections that need to be completed when you're submitting your FAFSA. The student demographics, where you'll be asked to provide your social security number, name, date of birth, email address, your physical address and residency status, and your gender. The school selection is going to ask the name of your high school and the colleges that you want listed on your FAFSA. Now, federal student aid is not just going to take your personal and financial aid information and blast it out to every college across the country. You have to give them permission by listing those schools. They're going to ask for your housing plans on each of those campuses, and that's how they'll determine what your cost of attendance is. Then the dependency status section, which will consist of a list of 10 questions that will determine whether you're a dependent or independent student, the number of dependents living in your household, and your parents' education. And students aren't quite sure, or parents aren't quite sure why they need to know this info about parents' education, but this is used to determine whether the student is a first generation college student. And that could benefit you because there is some additional money that you could be offered if you are a first gen student. So make sure you're answering that question correctly. Then the parent demographic section, which will be asked for parent social security numbers, their names, how long they've lived in Louisiana, their marital status, and then you're moving on to the parent and student financials where they're going to ask about your income and any federal benefits you might receive. The student's financial section is going to mimic the parent financials, and it can be confusing because parents might finish their financial section and then they're asking the same questions again, but remember they're asking this of the student. If the student does not have any earnings, that's fine. Just remember to put zeros where asked. You don't want to leave any blanks within the FAFSA. So be sure that you are filling in those with zeros if the student did not earn any money. Then it's time to sign and submit. This is where your FSA IDs are going to come into play. And finally, the confirmation page. So as you move through the FAFSA, if you do have a question, you see the question mark beside each question. You can always click there for a lengthier description of what they want in that field. There are hyperlinks throughout the form that you can click on for definitions and further information about what's being asked of you. You can request an online FAFSA chat, call Federal Student Aid, or you can call me at Leela's FAFSA Helpline and I'll be happy to answer your questions. But for this session, I'm going to just cover the most commonly asked FAFSA questions. If you have a question that I don't address tonight, this afternoon, you can drop it in the chat box below and I'll answer it at the end of the presentation. Or if you prefer, I'm going to provide my email address to you if you want to respond, if you want me to respond to you individually. Now the citizenship requirement. Remember that the student must be a citizen or an eligible non-citizen to complete the FAFSA. An eligible non-citizen is one of those hyperlinks. If you're not quite sure, which you are, you can click on that hyperlink to give you a better understanding. If a student is a citizen or an eligible non-citizen, but his parents are not, that's fine. You can still complete a FAFSA, but the parents will just enter zeros in lieu of a social security number in any place in the FAFSA that they're asked to do that. As I mentioned, only the colleges that you list on the FAFSA in the school selection section are going to consider you for student financial aid. So you'll want to add all of the colleges that you're considering, and you can add up to 10 at a time. If you're planning to apply to more than 10 colleges, there are instructions on this page, so be sure to follow those to add additional schools. So to determine your dependency status, these are the 10 questions that you'll need to consider. Will you be 24 or older by January 1st of the year for which you're applying for financial aid? Are you married or separated but not divorced? Will you be working on a graduate degree? Do you have children who receive more than half of their support from you? Do you have dependents other than children or a spouse who live with you and receive more than half of their support from you? And remember, they're asking the student these questions. Are you currently serving on active duty in the U.S. Armed Forces? for purposes other than training. So this is going to exclude boot camp and basic training. Are you a veteran of the U.S. Armed Forces? At any time since you turned 13, were both of your parents deceased? Were you in foster care, or were you a ward or a dependent of the court? Are you an emancipated minor, or are you in legal guardianship as determined by a court? And it's important to note that legal custody is not always considered legal guardianship. So make sure you have a copy of your documentation in front of you before you answer this question. Are you an unaccompanied youth who's homeless? Or are you self-supporting and at risk of being homeless? If you can answer yes to just one of these questions and provide legal documents supporting your claim, then you're considered an independent student for FAFSA purposes, and you won't have to provide parental information. But for FAFSA purposes, you're not considered an independent student simply because you file your own taxes, or you might live alone and support yourself. Now, the most commonly asked question, who do I report as my parent on the FAFSA? And just remember that the parent or parents that you've lived with the longest in the past 12 months should be listed on your FAFSA. So if you live with both of your biological parents, you want to list both of them. That's easy. But if the parent you lived with the longest in the past 12 months is separated, divorced, or was never married, you should list that parent on the FAFSA. However, if that parent is remarried, now you should include his or her spouse on your FAFSA. In other words, federal student aid wants to know the financial standing of the household that the student has lived in the longest in the 12 months prior to the date that the FAFSA was submitted. If you're identified as a dependent student, but your parents will not provide their information on your FAFSA, you're just going to want to answer, I'm unable to provide information about my parents. State that you don't have a special circumstance, and then go ahead and submit your FAFSA without parental information. But please contact your college's financial aid office to discuss this situation, because they can override your federal student aid estimates if they find that you have a special situation here with your parents not providing your info. So you want to make sure that you're talking to them individually. They're not going to contact you to say, oh, I see you missed the parent section. Are you sure that you don't want to go back and fill it out? This is your responsibility to speak to them about this situation. So to expedite the processing of your federal student aid, the student and parents should use this Internal Revenue data retrieval tool to provide their income information. So if either the parent or the student did not file a return, though in that case you're going to just state that you're not going to file, or that you will file, and you're going to manually enter your info. If you didn't work at all in 2019, you're simply going to put zeros in the income fields, but don't leave any blanks. Using this data retrieval tool is going to greatly diminish your chances of being selected for verification on your college campus, which is sort of a kind of appeals process. So if you're having trouble using this tool, contact Federal Student Aid or call us at the Tela FAFSA helpline. We want to make sure you are able to use it so that you can skip this tedious step. Once you do connect to the IRS, you're going to see, you're here in the website, you're going to want to take your 2019 income tax return and you're going to want to provide information in the blanks listed here and mimic the information printed on your tax return. So even if your address has changed or your name is misspelled, this has to reflect exactly what's on your tax return. And that's why it's important to have this return with you to make this data retrieval tool process successful. Now, if you don't have a copy of your tax return, be sure before you get started on your FAFSA to contact your tax preparer and get a duplicate copy of that return. If not, you can always go to the IRS site and you can request a tax transcript. Now you're almost finished with your FAFSA at this point. So you want to make sure you are reviewing your student aid report. This is going to pop up right before it's time to sign your FAFSA. So make sure that every question you were asked and your answer to it is correct. And this is going to eliminate some errors and make it easier for the College Financial Aid Office to process your aid timely. The student and one of his parents is going to sign the FAFSA using the FSA ID. And if you would happen to skip this section and go ahead and submit your FAFSA, it's going to be considered incomplete. And you're going to be reminded by federal student aid to go back into your FAFSA, sign it, and resubmit. Once you do submit, you're going to see your confirmation page pop up on your screen. This is a good time to print it and take a look at the next steps that you need to take to complete the student financial aid process. You'll also see a list of colleges that are going to receive your data. You can review your estimated expected family contribution and consider your financial aid estimates. And I'm going to emphasize the word estimate because these estimates are based on your FAFSA answers. Each college financial aid office is going to verify the information you've submitted, and they're going to use that information to determine your aid on their campus. Once your FAFSA is fully processed, it's shared with your colleges. Then the financial aid office on each of those campuses is going to begin to identify any aid that you might be eligible to receive on their campus. If your family's financial situation has changed since 2019, we're going to see a lot of that this year with the COVID-19 pandemic. People have lost their jobs or they've had a reduction of income. Perhaps you've lost one of your parents. Any special situation that has happened to you to affect your income from 2019 can be discussed individually with your college financial aid counselor. They can make adjustments to what federal student aid recommends by using what they call professional judgment. So don't be shy about talking to them about your situation. This could mean more grant money for you. Your net price is going to be determined by each college by subtracting any grants and scholarships that you're eligible to receive from your cost of attendance. And that's going to give you the net price, which you can either pay in cash or by accepting student loans to pay that balance. Your student financial aid offer should reflect the college's cost of attendance and any grants, scholarships, work study, and student loans that you've been offered. So read over it carefully and respond to any requests from the college financial aid counselors so that they can process your aid quickly. Remember that you're going to receive a separate financial aid offer from each of the schools you've listed on your FAFSA. So you'll want to communicate with each of those colleges. You want to accept your financial aid in this order: scholarships and grants, because these do not have to be repaid; federal work study, because you've earned this money and you don't have to pay it back; And then loans. Now, this is borrowed money. And remember that it does have to be repaid with interest. The student financial aid process is explained in detail in Leela's FAFSA completion guide and workbook for the class of 2021. And it's free for Louisiana high school seniors and parents. So ask your counselor if she has an electronic copy for you, or you can email me at carmichael@leela.org, and I'll provide that email address to you again at the end of the presentation. You'll want to use our senior checklist to stay on track this year, and I'll also include a copy of this when I send your guide. Now, scholarships, the most important topic today. Remember that these are gifts that don't have to be repaid, and there are thousands of them offered by schools and nonprofit and community organizations, by religious groups and social organizations. Some are merit-based, and they're awarded on academic achievement or a special talent or a trait that you might have, and others are based on financial need. A scholarship might cover the entire cost of your tuition, or it could be a one-time award of a few $100s. But remember, either way, it's worth applying for because it's going to reduce the cost of your education. So there are ways to find out more about scholarships. I know that your high school counselor speaks to you about these all the time. I'm sure she has some posted on her webpage. And also your college financial aid office is a good resource. This year, Leela is offering 2 different scholarships. A $1,000 FAFSA completion scholarship for seniors attending a Louisiana high school who've completed their FAFSA, and a $1,000 Choose Louisiana scholarship for students attending a Louisiana college. So you can visit us at leela.org for the details and for the application. For students who have exhausted all their opportunities for free money for grants and their federal and state dollars, Leela has developed a nonprofit education loan program, and you can find out more about that at leelachoice.org. Your questions are always welcomed, and now's the time if you want to chat about it. You can use the chat box below, and I will answer your questions in our time remaining. I also want to make sure that you jot down our FAFSA helpline number and my email address. A copy of the presentation and other financial aid tips is going to be posted on our YouTube channel. It's Ask Leela. So if you want to follow us and take a look at East St. John's financial aid presentation, you're welcome to do that. And remember to complete your FAFSA as soon as possible and then apply for Leela's $1,000 FAFSA completion scholarship. I don't see any comments in our chat box, so I'm going to go ahead and close out the presentation, but please feel free to contact me individually if you have any questions or concerns. Thanks again for having me.